Hi, and welcome to our panel discussion on the mentor-mentee relationship in civic engagement work. I'm joined today by two panelists who started their mentor-mentee relationship many years ago and have continued developing it over time, as well as becoming mentors to a number of different graduate and undergraduate students. On the panel today, we have Cherie Strong, Professor of Political Science and Director of the Ray C. Bliss Institute of Applied Politics at the University of Akron, and Kevin Lawrence II, Assistant Professor of Political Science at Saginaw Valley State University. I'm William Obrochta, Assistant Professor of Political Science at Texas Lutheran University and the Director of Professional Development for the APSA Civic Engagement section. If you missed it, this is the second part of our panel discussion on civic engagement and the mentor-mentee relationship. We have another panel focused on specifically graduate students that are transitioning into faculty roles and thinking about that relationship with civic engagement. But today, we're going to focus more on how the lessons from Cherie and Kevin's relationship in mentoring can translate to thinking about mentoring undergraduate students, as well as graduate students who are interested in careers as practitioners doing civic engagement work. And so I want to start off by thinking about kind of your journey from your bachelor or master's program to where you are right now. Both of y'all are graduates of institutions where you earned either your bachelor or master's degrees. And I wanted you to reflect back on your experience kind of being mentored at that point. And then we'll talk a little bit later about how that experience translates into how you think about mentoring bachelor's or master's students today. So Kevin, I wondered if I could start with you, looking back just a short time to when you were a student and thinking about your mentorship experience then.
So at SVSU,
Yes.
so my mentoringship at SVSU, one of the things that I enjoyed about it was that my professors were really, really accessible. It's a teaching focused regional, so the professors, if you don't like teaching, you're in the wrong job. So, at that point, all of them were really readily available, and to talk. One in particular is Dr. Eric Trump, who's now a colleague, and yeah, forgive the name. It's but Dr. Trump has been one of the alongside Cherie is one of the best mentors I've ever had. And in undergrad, he was really really good about just kind of seeing what my potential, if you will. And he had several conversations where he would take me aside and he's like, are you sure you want to be teaching just, K-12 teaching? Are you sure you wouldn't want to be doing like some research too? And maybe, so he was a big inspiration for me eventually going on to grad school and where I'm at here. Another great thing that he did is that he was always willing, he was always available for whatever I needed, whether that be in the classroom or outside of the classroom. He was also really instrumental in talking about careers that, other careers out there and giving me kind of the field for saying like, there's a lot of applied stuff, there's a lot of, academic stuff and everything in between. And he encouraged, but he never like tried to push me in one way, if you will. It was whatever he could do to support me. And so then, it was great when I went to Central, when I met Cherie then, too, because, it was like, oh, good, here's the equivalent of Dr. Trump here, so that's been really, those mentoring relationships were of why I'm here today, of where I'm at today.
Cherie, I wonder about your experience being mentored in your bachelor and master's programs.
Sure. I think I would echo Kevin's experiences. The best mentors that I had were people who were willing to get to know me and listen to what I thought I wanted to do and give me feedback. And also, I mean, at Akron, where I got my master's degree from Akron, went away, and now I'm back. Here at Akron, the master's degree has a required internship experience because it's an applied program, and the actually like requiring the internship and saying, we're going to make you try on what you think you want to do for the rest of your life. And that was pivotal. In my experiences, I had to write a reflective paper and I was unhappy with working in campaigns. Like I was unhappy with working. I was a public relations, political science undergrad, thought that I would be working on the, the political communication in an applied way. And I was really unhappy. And Steve Brooks was my professor here, and he made me write a reflective paper, and I had to figure out why I wasn't happy, right? Why this wasn't what, rather than blaming individuals, right? Rather than saying, well, it was my supervisor, it was this, it was something about the nature of the work that just was not as fulfilling as I thought it was going to be. And so, that's another example of building it into the curriculum, because then he read that paper and gave me feedback. And that is exactly when I went, oh, I like reading and studying about this, right? And much more suited to my personality and my needs personally, than working in it, right, as a consultant. And that's when I decided to go on and get my PhD. So, whether it's embedding that into the curriculum and into writing assignments, or whether it's, I had another professor, Dan Shea, who's chair at Colby College now, who went to lunch with me as I was like, sort of like, why am I not happy? Like, what, like, how do you, I kind of like working with you as a TA, like, how do I get that job? And, took me to lunch and told me what it was like to get a PhD. People who were just willing to listen, and give me feedback was incredibly important, particularly in my master's program.
And then how, Kevin, does that translate into your thoughts about mentoring students today? How does that experience that you had, I mean, you're still working there with some of the same colleagues, and so you can recreate that experience, but how does that translate to how you're thinking today?
I half jokingly tell my undergrads, normally in earshot of my colleagues, if my door is ever closed, I will always open it for a student, not for a colleague necessarily. And they do literally do that. I will have I'll have my door closed or whatever. Normally I keep my door open all the time, but and I'll have students that will always knock and I'll always answer. And I always try to be present, always try to be available for whatever it may be. I like to, I don't get anything done during my office hours because I always normally have a student or somebody is stopping by to chat. And I love that part of my job. I also try to be very empathetic and understanding of where they're coming from or what concerns they have. I've had professors in the past, colleagues even in the past, that have been very dismissive of concerns that I might have expressed, like saying, oh, you don't have to worry about that. But that's not, we can often say that from a position of we've had, 10, 20 years of experience. And so we know it's not a problem, but tell that to a student who is just starting out. And so being able to have that empathy for understanding and then, work through it with them. I also really like to cultivate relationships with my students by getting to know them. And that helps me, especially with our majors and minors, for me to be able to, when I see an opportunity come across my desk or an email, that I can be like, oh, I have 3 students that might be interested. That I don't know that just simply through the classroom interaction. It has to be more, it has to cultivate that relationship. And I have found that students are really interested in cultivating those relationships to be able to find those opportunities. I'm actually really, I'm at a stage now in my career where students will be coming to me saying like, hey, I don't want this opportunity, but maybe somebody else that has. So like they've become part of that larger network ecology, if you will. And so I really try to mimic, Dr. Trump and Cherie. I really try to mimic that. And I think it's one of the most rewarding parts, especially at the university institution that I'm at, which is predominantly first generation, predominantly comes from rural areas. These are students that are totally capable as any other student, but have not necessarily had the opportunity structures that others have. And so being exposed to that means that they are often overwhelmed. Does not mean that they're not capable, far from it. But they often are just overwhelmed. And so being able to, and I come from a similar background. And so being able to sit there and say like, okay, we can do this, and, walk with them on that path, on that journey. So.
Cherie, what about you in terms of thinking about ways to provide effective mentorship?
I think effective mentorship at the end of the day is being willing get to know someone. But sometimes we do that through a little bit more structured way, through writing assignments or reflective essays that we might have them write. Like, for example, I wind up, for whatever reason, supervising a lot of independent studies and honors projects. I think in part because it's word has spread. I've only been here for 2 years, but word has spread that I will let you work on a project that you are interested in, and not, not sort of a canned project like that I push everyone into. And, the very first meeting when I sit with my students is to have a conversation about what do you think you want to do? What kind of product, what kind of paper, what kind of white paper, what kind of research will serve as a portfolio piece for you, or will help you learn about the job market, right? Or the graduate school experience where you think you're headed. So I just had, for good example, I have a really great undergraduate student who finally did decide to come back to us for her master's in applied politics. I'm really excited to work with her. And for her honors project, I helped her connect to prominent people in the civic engagement world, right? So people at Circle, people at All In, people that are doing the voter registration and civic engagement work through the nonprofit world, because she thinks that might be where she wants to land. And so her final honors project was to sort of map the ecology of, what does that environment look like? What are the job opportunities? What kind of different work is taking place through those nonprofit organizations? And that was her, and what advice would they give us for improving the civic environment and the civic ethos at Akron from all of those nonprofits. And so a white paper that turned into sort of a strategic plan for the Bliss Institute and the University of Akron was what she produced as her honors project. I could not guide her to that kind of a project if I didn't first take, 15, 20 minutes when she first came to me to sit and say, what do you think you want to do? Where do you think you want to go? And I also tell my students about my own internship experience. And I praise Dr. Stephen Brooks, like, do an internship, because you might think on paper that this is where you want to be, and you will start off in that career. If I hadn't realized that I didn't want to be a consultant, I would have been 5 years in to a career that wasn't making me happy, and then had to decide to go back and get a PhD, right? So coming to those realizations early and saying, you are young, try these different things out, see where you fit, and it might not be where you think. And giving them that ability to have experiences that help them make those decisions on their own. Whether we do it through individual mentoring and taking someone time to go to lunch with someone, or whether we do it through these, sort of more structured ways that we think carefully about assignments and activities that are part of the curriculum. I think both can be important ways to learn from your students what they want to do.
Some kind of intentional discernment, right? So helping students go through a process that they might not themselves be aware of, what the outcome might be, and required internships or those other types of experiences can help with that. But then, being really responsive to what students are saying and giving you feedback on, I might be a pre-law concentration, but I'm just that because everybody else is doing that, and I'm really interested in XYZ. But I don't know as a student what XYZ looks like. And so then having that opportunity to provide, or saying, I recommend that we do this, can often be really impactful. And both of y'all talked about advising and mentorship systems or ways of thinking that seemed really well developed and well honed. And I wondered then, who taught you how to do this, right? This is one of those areas in political science PhD programs, along with teaching or along with service work or along with the advising and mentorship part, that there usually isn't, here's the class and how to do it. So I wondered, beyond the exemplars that y'all have mentioned earlier, what were some of the development processes that helped you figure out this system along the way? Cherie, you look really ready to jump in.
I'm ready to talk.
Go for it.
Okay, so I think that I got good mentoring. I'm very close to first gen. My mother is the baby of 13 and is the only one who has a college degree. She was a school teacher. And so I'm not quite first gen, but I'm really close. And I feel like the way that I got good mentoring my mother sent me off. She didn't go to a big university, and she sent me off to, to college and said, I don't know how to tell you how to do this. Just go ask questions. Like, if you don't know how to do something, keep asking questions until someone answers you. And I'm extroverted enough. Like, when someone's door was closed or they didn't want to talk to me, I just went down the hall, like, knock, knock, knock. I have a question. And I feel like I got the best mentoring because I was an extrovert. And I'm really conscientious of that. I ask people, like, in my master's degree, can we go to lunch and have a conversation? Or I stopped by people's office hours and asked very pointed questions. I am conscious enough to know that not everyone is, particularly people who want to be academics, perhaps, don't necessarily have that strength. And so I want to put systems in place to make sure that my introverted students, or students who are first generation, or students who might be overlooked because of their race or their gender, as not of not being, like, thought of as a professor or thought of as someone who should be in charge of or in a leadership role. I want to make sure that they get what I got. And so I am very conscious of putting these systems in place for myself in the way that I mentor, to make sure I'm accessible and available and getting feedback, from everyone that needs help, and not just the ones who are comfortable knocking on my door.
In addition to that, I got two. One has been trial and error. It's been as Sheree had mentioned, I had a K-12 background, and so I find often that a lot of those techniques of classroom management, in terms of meeting with students, of being able to identify and show that you're, open, if you will, have been very helpful even at in the college classroom. And so, for one small thing, is I try to learn all of my students' names, and that's often enough just to break the ice that they're willing then to come and talk for whatever the reason is. And so I guess that's my second thing, is, learning their names, being able to have that opening environment. I have to say that obviously there's the exemplars, as you mentioned, but beyond those, it's also been, we've all had individuals where have just not been great mentors, great professors, great people. And I think those are actually, if anything, are probably first and foremost in my mind, because I never want a student to feel like I felt that I was the cause of that feeling, like I felt with an interaction with one of those bad examples, if you will. And in many respects, those, tell you this is what we don't want to do. So now the rest is, how do you make sure that you don't end up there? And I think that we need to be conscientious of that. And I guess the last thing is, I've been very humble in terms of, every new group of students teaches you something new about how to. So for instance, the group that is coming through right now, from being in the online environment because of COVID, they are very, introverted, because systemic forces force them into an isolated incident where they are very trepidatious at times of, like, even engaging with you. And so you have to try different tactics in order to get there. And again, it's not a reflection on that they're not capable. It's just like, okay, this is a different way that I have to reach you. And so I think being wedded to that notion of constant innovation and improvement is what makes a good mentor, is that they keep adapting.
And being intentional, as both of you have mentioned, is important. And Sheree, you were talking about the extroverted approach of knocking on doors, and you can replicate. In my experience, you can replicate that too. One thing that I did was, at each institution I've been to, I've emailed all the faculty in the department and been like, hey, right when I got there, hey, can we go to lunch? Or hey, can we? And so then at least it's kind of like Kevin's model, you know who each other are. And then once you get over that awkward, like, first 5 minutes of this, then you don't have to see somebody in the hall and not know who they are and then not be willing to reach out, right? So it's not, it's a more systematic thing than being like, hey, I'm excited to go down and knock on someone's door because I'm an extroverted person, right? If you can set up the system to do that, then that can get over that hump more easily. And then 10 years from now, you're not still wondering who your colleague in dramatic media is. And at that point, it's too awkward to go down and say, I've been here 10 years already, right? So there are, if you're not, as Cherie was mentioning, in the position where you're the most extroverted person, there's strategies I think you can employ in those first couple years to say, well, I'm new here. Here's a reason that I need to reach out to you and learn some things, and then developing those practices over time. I wanted to think about, we've talked about mentoring kind of in general, but what about for students that are interested in kind of practitioner careers related to civic engagement? So this could be undergraduate students who are, you know, like Cherie was at the time, thinking about those types of careers, or it can be master's students who aren't thinking about academia, but are instead thinking about being practitioners. And, you know, sometimes students will come to me and say, well, why should I listen to you for advice? You're not actually the one in the field doing it, right? They say it more kindly than that. But, you know, I wonder about, well, to what extent should we be doing the mentorship for those students, or should we find the mentors in the careers, you know, or both, as was kind of mentioned a little bit earlier. So what does that kind of look like for the students that aren't interested in academia, but are interested in being practitioners? And where do we fit as faculty members in that relationship? Cherie?
Sure. I think this is one of the best reasons to mentor all of your students and maintain connections with them, because I rely on my alumni constantly for this, right? And the network and the connections that I've maintained with students who have gone on to do things besides academe. And so, you know, I hopefully know someone either because of my connections to the civic engagement world, or because we have lots of students that go on to have successful law careers, or, you know, the Bliss Institute, right, has a huge list of alumni in Columbus and DC, right? Because so many of those students coming through our applied program want to go on and work in, you know, either as staffers in legislatures, or, you know, policy think tanks, or as consultants. That hopefully I know someone who can provide a good internship experience, can, you know, provide the kind of insight and mentoring that I can't in a particular field. We hire our alums sometimes when they have master's degrees and then long careers to come back and teach for us, right? Half of the classes in the Bliss Master of Applied Politics are taught by consultants, not by political scientists, specifically because they have that network and those connections and those experiences. So I think that's a huge incentive for us to mentor people that don't want PhDs, because then they become our best resource for our undergraduate students.
The alumni are like, I want to just reemphasize that, especially at a program like ours, where we have a lot of students that go on for terminal masters. But even then, our alumni are in the field. They're, you know, they come back, they help us. They're often the source of internships, frankly, because they are looking for, they know the program and they know the quality. So they're like, give me a cardinal, you know, and so forth. But alongside that, though, too, there has been times where I've relied on a network, you know, like Cherie or others, you know, to say like, I don't know anybody, do you? You know, and so there's been these, I'll give you an example. About a month ago, a colleague at U of M Flint, Kim Sachs, she had connections with, she runs an MPA program, and, you know, she had connections with a nonprofit individual in the region that I just didn't have, but I had a student who was really interested in that field work and so forth, called up Kim, and, you know, the connection was made. So I think also there's the benefit of having those alumni or practitioners that you know from those external partnerships that you might have, and bringing them into the classroom, or bring them at least on campus to talk to your students, because it's often beneficial when they say the same thing that you've been trying to, you know, lecture to them and everything. And then they're like, oh, well, you might know what you're talking about, or, you know, so, and I think there's just human nature. There's just something about that. But I think though, I think that the alumni network, I mean, Cherie took the one that I was thinking of. That one is just really, really important from the applied side of things. And we have a large amount of pre-law majors is probably our biggest area. And relying on that network has been just instrumental in developing, in cultivating cultivating the experiential experiences, but also cultivating that real applied knowledge and showing students too that there is life beyond these walls once you graduate. And I think that that's really, really helpful for students. It's great for retention efforts. It's also great for students for their stress levels as they approach their senior year.
And that means you as a mentor can take a role in, well, not just hoping the alumni come back to you, but being intentional about creating, depending on your institution type, right? Creating those lists, if that's not something anybody maintains, or if alumni relations doesn't give you the alumni list, which is true at some places, and maintaining some contact, right? Or helping foster student organizations in the department or program that can then reach out to people, or having those, oh, everybody that did an internship come and get together, right? Even if you're not the one giving the direct advice, you can set up an environment where those connections are more easily made and obtained. And that helps, students really figure out what they're interested in doing in a more systematic way than being like, every time I must rely on this one person that I remember from the program.
Yeah, and I would just say LinkedIn is fabulous, right? As someone who predates LinkedIn by age, just a fabulous way to keep in touch, right? Is, just all of those students that are graduating, say, send me a LinkedIn request, right? And get them connected. And then when you have positions to reshare because alumni are searching, or, you want to put people in touch with each other, it makes it so much easier. Big fan.
So we've talked a lot throughout this session about strategies for mentoring, giving the best mentoring advice, etc. And I wanted to end with a question that is about your kind of personal incentives or benefits from being a mentor. So we can think about this in a couple ways. One, right, is the value and the knowledge that you're going out and producing individuals that are in a position to better understand their career and contribute to society. And then there are also kind of the tenure promotion types of incentives. And so I wondered what, you thought were the benefits of investing in a strong mentorship program from your perspective. What are the benefits to you? And then how is that effective mentoring recognized or valued? Cherie, maybe if you wanted to think about this first.
I was waiting for Kevin's going to think about it while I talk.
I'll say numbers.
I think, part of the motivation for doing this, for me is that I had to seek it out, and I don't want my students to ever have to seek it out. So part of it is normative for me, and it makes me feel good, and it makes me feel connected to my teaching. And I do civic engagement work about young people. It makes me feel connected to my research. I feel like I'm doing something good for society, and for our discipline. We have 3 students from our MAP this year who have gone on with funding for their PhD. I feel like I'm doing good things for the discipline. I feel like I'm doing good things for society when I put these thoughtful, well-trained, excited, enthusiastic students out there into the world. And I just want to help them. But you always, right? You always have to make sure that that you're getting credit for it. And you always have to make sure. So sometimes even, I'm past tenure and promotion stages, right? So I'm tenured in full. But I always used to keep a running list of all the students. If you're doing extra independent studies, if you're doing extra honors projects, how are people rewarded for that? If you're not being rewarded for it in terms of, sometimes there's a financial bump, or sometimes you get a 1 credit course release for mentoring so many students, and then it turns into, a course release after so many years. If you're not being rewarded in concrete ways that the university is keeping track of, keep track of it yourself, right? You may even want to go turn to some of those students you've been instrumental in helping at tenure and promotion times, who can write you letters of support and talk about how helpful and instrumental you were in supporting their launch, or keeping them retained and helping them graduate. You have to ways to use that work to make a case for yourself. And don't be shy about it, right? And don't be shy about it, because if you are the kind of person who is good at or cares about or does this work well, you will wind up doing a lot of it. And so make sure you're getting as much credit as you possibly can.
I'll echo all of that with Cherie or what Cherie said because um I really enjoy like the students that I've worked with. I see them as the next public spirited, engaged citizens. And in the area that I'm in, we need more of them. And they can come from all different political persuasions, but at the end of the day, they are engaged. They're community oriented, and um, I think that that's kind of in my way, like, the headwinds that we face as a country right now seem very daunting from one person's perspective. But from my perspective, it's like I'm helping cultivate the next garden, if you will, or gardeners, and so forth. So the other thing then is to keep track of it for sure. And it would be nice if you're at a university or even a department that recognizes that. And I will say that my department colleagues have been very, I advise two of our student organizations. And as you had mentioned earlier, William, there's a lot that goes into cultivating that network too, where the students are engaging in kind of that mentoring ship as well for the undergraduates or for the lower classmen and so forth. Um, that takes a lot of time and effort too, but it pays dividends in the long run. It pays, for sure. I received the university's Advisor of the Year award this past year for my efforts, and so and I will say that award means quite a bit actually compared to like or you got a course release for this or whatever. That award is very humbling. And it says you're having an impact of some sort. But I'm at an institution that has a history of recognizing that as part of its culture and so forth. Not everybody is at an institution like that. Does not mean that work is still not important and valuable in the long run. But so as Cherie had said, keep track of it is probably the best advice that I can give in that circumstances. And then one last thing is don't be afraid to, be humble, but there's also something about saying like, I have done this, like own that what you have done. To say like, I have these connections with students, or I've been working with that student for 3 years and so forth. You don't have to be a snob about that, but you can also say like, I have these connections, I have cultivated these relationships and so forth. Again, it's like kind of ownership of that in a way.
And finding the way to communicate those relationships in a way that your university understands, right? Some places it's numbers, right? I calculate how many students I have in office hours, and at a previous institution, they really wanted to know, numbers for things, and that was not a common occurrence that anybody had anyone. And I said, well, I have 173 students that came to office. And so that meant something there versus, as Cherie mentioned, well, letters from students might mean more at a different place. And so, understanding, even if it's not explicitly written into tenure and promotions, your colleagues might not know about it. Advising often just happens in the office, and that's hard to know. Well, was this just you signing a bunch of forms to do schedule changes, or was this something more that was happening? And so communicating in a language that your university recognizes, I think, is an important point. And so to kind of, yeah, Kevin.
One brief thing too with that, mentoring is like in the office or, just signing something or giving advice. I think it's also you being present and engaged with student activities too. So, like I go to, especially in the fall and winter, there's always something going on every night, and you just being there and participating, maybe you had a role up front, maybe you're just there for emotional support, what have you. Students recognize that, students really appreciate that. And frankly, I appreciated back in the day when professors would do that for me, or just be there, somebody smiling in the background, is more than enough often. And so doing that too, which also I think universities need to take that into account too, as part of service, as part of being engaged in your community, the campus community. It's not just students, it's also us.
That's an excellent point in terms of showing up as part of the service work. So I want to wrap up the panel today by thinking we started with asking you to go all the way back to when you were being advised and mentored and came to some advice that you were giving others about that process. And again, intentionality stuck out as a key characteristic. So intentionality in trying to develop your path toward being an effective mentor to students, but then knowing that there isn't a guidebook for doing this, and that at a lot of institutions or programs it might not be taught. And so how can you go about developing your own processes that try to make advising and mentoring more effective, and then distributing some of that work to rely on alumni, or developing processes that can help you not just be one person in this process, but a whole network and group on campus and off campus that can help support students. And so I think that's a really helpful message for those at institutions that are thinking, well, hey, I'm overwhelmed, I can't do all this on my own. You can develop that system that can really help you rely on others that then can benefit when your students go work with them or get into that field. And so I want to thank you all again for participating, and encourage everyone else to go back and look at our other panel on mentoring, specifically graduate students and new faculty interested in civic engagement. But I appreciate y'all's time and look forward to continuing the conversation later on.